Now, the most successful advertisements are those that are creative. That's fairly obvious, isn't it? And therefore more memorable to the viewer. These kind of ads often, though, use material such as music or images or artwork in playful ways to spice up the message. But amidst all this creativity, I think there are legal lines and something that I want to explore on Mags on Media. I want to introduce you to Zama Buthelezi, partner at the law firm Spoor Fisher, South Africa. Zama, a very warm welcome to you. First of all, copyright. Why is this an issue right now? Why have you chosen to raise it? Is there more infringement in advertising?
Sure. Jeremy, this has always been an issue. That's why, for example, we have law firms that are 100 years old that specialize in intellectual property. I think now, though, with the digital era, we basically have, we are more prone to
Mm.
seeing infringement. We have platforms such as Twitter that, call big companies out live for, stealing other people's hard work. So I think it's just more topical right now, but it's always definitely been an issue.
And brand beware, because if you're caught, the penalties can be harsh.
Yes, no, definitely. I don't know if you want me to expand on that, but
I would like to hear exactly what people are in for should they break the law. I mean, the punishment, as we've said, can be fairly onerous.
yes. So one of the things, logically speaking, if you are a company and you go to the extent of advertising, and advertising is an expensive, exercise. If you're going to put work out there, then you're going to have to take it down. That is a loss in terms of money. So number one, the biggest thing that you want if someone has infringed your work or is using your work without permission, you want them to stop. So all of that money that's gone into that advert, that's completely gone. It's a
Mm.
waste. And then, you can also be liable for paying damages to that particular company, or to the particular person who you've infringed. So it's really a loss at the end of the day that you don't want to be faced with.
Zama Buthelezi, give us a good, useful, and easy definition of what copyright is in this commercial space, and also tell me how difficult it is to prove.
So, um, good and easy, useful definition. Copyright, it basically is a form of intellectual property because we have different forms of intellectual property, trademarks being one of them, patents being another, for instance. And this particular form of intellectual property applies to specific works. So, artistic works, if you paint something, if you
Mm.
draw something, it applies to literary works, i.e., books or written material. I mean, newspapers, for example, newspaper articles. So, it applies to a certain listed works, and it comes about when you have put that work into material form. So basically, if you are still dreaming it up in your head or thinking about it or talking about it as an idea, you don't have any copyright in it until you've put it down, in essence, on paper.
And the second part of my question, is it difficult to prove or fairly obvious?
It can be difficult to prove, depending on the circumstances. I think what we usually say to people is keep a chain of evidence proving that you created the work, you know. Um, keep the different versions because we usually fine tune work a couple of times before we get to the final product, etc. And those are the sort of things that will help you in terms of evidencing that
Mm.
you are, the creator and the owner of
All
the
right,
work.
so you've given us a very good theoretical background. I want to look at an example now. When it comes to using music in ads, the lesson here is don't use it without obtaining permission. What happened to BMW in 2020?
So I don't believe that the matter went to court. I haven't heard of anything like that. However, what happened is, BMW was exposed. I think it was on Twitter, where people were like, "Can you hear that?" Well, in fact, I think it was Questa himself who
Mm.
put it out there and said that BMW is using my song and they never asked me for permission and they never paid me. And of course, South Africans, you know how we are, went absolutely crazy. Like, this is Questa's hard work. How can you do this? And I assume that there have since been some conversations between Questa and BMW. Who knows? Maybe he was paid a certain amount to, basically get the issue out of the way.
A lot of righteous public indignation, but also beware, because with social media, the watchdog element, I would imagine, is ubiquitous. Finally, let me ask you about image rights, and take me to a bicycle outfitter and a well-known media personality. Who am I talking about, and what happened?
This is Basetsana Kumalo. So a couple of years back, she went into a store, Cycle Lab, if I'm not mistaken, and she tried on some of the clothing, and the I think the owner took a picture of her, and when he took a picture of her, this was with her consent.
Mm.
Of course, the issue then is that she did not consent to the image then being used to actually advertise the clothing, you know. So what happened there is, of course, the image was used, and Basitsana took Cycle Lab to court, and she said, "No, I did not endorse this brand. I am not associated with this brand." And of course, advertising, showing advertisements with me wearing this clothing makes it look as if this is something that I've agreed to. And she actually won the case. So, one must be very, very careful. You see a celebrity, you think you're going to take pictures of them and then suddenly link them with your product or your whatever you're doing. It does not work that
Mm.
way. I mean, those people make money from their personalities.
I sense a lot of ignorance, but I also suspect a lot of chance taking and expediency as well. Thanks for the update. Zama Buthelezi, partner at the law firm Spoor and Fisher South Africa. Thank you very much for joining me on Mags on Media here on Biz News. Well, a very warm welcome in association with Biz News. Welcome to Mags on Media in this episode, why Africa's biggest beer brand is in the wedding dress business. I'm going to try and shine a new light on so-called dark marketing and where are the legal lines for brands when it comes to copyright. Now, we've all heard the expression dark marketing, and as far as I'm concerned, it's associated with maybe slipping cigarettes to teenagers at parties that take place in places that we don't want to go to ourselves. But I suspect it's a whole lot more than that. And I want to introduce you to Matthew van der Valk, as an executive creative director at the agency VMLY&R, and he has more than 15 years experience in dark marketing. Matthew, a very warm welcome to you. Immediately I wanted to call you Lord Voldemort because I started. That's where we kind of place dark marketing. But you make the point that it's not intrinsically illicit. So maybe a good starting point for our conversation is to tell me what dark marketing is. Is there a new definition?
Yeah, and I think for me, what's really important to remember around dark marketing is that I suppose it's the term dark that kind of throws people for a spin, but it's more about the fact that it's not in the public eye. It's more personal. It's more about understanding the people that you're speaking to on a more individualistic basis. And it's trying to find new ways to communicate with people that are perhaps a little bit more relevant to consumers. And it's about inventing media. So I think that, traditionally we have TV, we have radio, we have all the above the line and below the line that we're used to kind of hearing about. But where dark marketing really starts to shine, I guess, is in the space of inventing new media. So it's about looking at the entire marketing mix. It's not just about communications. So for example, we might look at distribution as a channel. And who are the different stakeholders across a distribution network for a particular brand that might be able to influence and impart some kind of marketing message on whoever the stakeholder is at that point in that purchasing journey.
If I had a rand for every time someone said to me that in order for brands to succeed, they have to be brave, I would be a very rich person and we wouldn't be doing this interview. But the reality is that creativity, you suggest, is where the magic of dark marketing lies. But it's also up to brands to be courageous, to be brave, and to break their own habit, and then for consumers to break a habit of traditional approach as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what's quite different, I think, with dark marketing is the approach to story. So with traditional marketing, we're all kind of going out into market, trying to shout the loudest and say why we're so important and why everyone should consider us. Where dark marketing is different is that it considers the story of the individuals that it aims to serve and tries to find a way for us to be part of that story. And so the creativity is slightly different. It's not about creating the next big concept. It's about saying, who are these people? How do they operate? What's important to them? What's their story? So it's a little more listening and a little less speaking. And you'd be surprised how many channels make themselves available. It's about looking at every single moment in these consumers' lives and where we can become part of their lives. One of the things at VMLY&R that we often talk about is brands that live in people's lives. So how are we becoming those brands that are more important, that have relevance in our consumers' lives? So it's a little less about kind of advertising and a little bit more about, is it available in terms of the distribution? Is the product relevant? How are our consumers using our product? Sometimes the way that we intend our product to be used is completely different to the people actually using it. And so it's about listening to the consumer, unlocking those insights, and then leveraging them in everything that we do.
So beyond listening to the consumer, and one would assume that's what brands and their agents should be doing anyway. It's almost marketing 101. How does a brand need to start recalibrating its approach when it comes to looking for those hidden or dark channels that we've been referring to?
I think that one of the things that we often talk about doing as kind of brand custodians, but don't actually do that well, is we say, yes, we're going to do something innovative. Yes, we're going to do a test market. Yes, we're going to try out this new way of approaching this consumer. And then we roll out our 5 million rand TV ad and then pat ourselves on the back.
Followed shortly afterwards by a billboard. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah. I think it's about kind of mixing up your marketing mix and trying things. What works for one brand isn't going to work for another. And, it's also about fatigue. So as we're inventing new channels, it's not good enough to just kind of come up with new ideas for these new channels that we invent. It's about coming up with new channels consistently. Another way that we can kind of look at this is, I don't necessarily believe, particularly in dark marketing approaches, in always looking at what your competitors are doing. And I know that's a little bit controversial, but I think that there's more value in looking out of category. What can for example, luxury car manufacturer learn from a discount clothing retailer in terms of merchandising? What can you learn as an orange juice brand from a luxury car manufacturer? And what I mean by that is looking at the context. So if you walk into a supermarket, all the orange juices are merchandised next to each other. How are they standing out? And if you're going to buy a luxury car, all of the car dealerships are normally clustered together. So how do you stand out? How do you access a market? How do you start using these unexpected places and spaces and tactics to apply to completely different industries? And that's where it starts to become really creative and really interesting, is we almost take an approach to a car dealership in that example of merchandising as opposed to your traditional comms.
So in conclusion, give me an example of where your world of dark marketing has been successful beyond tobacco and cigarettes. What has stood out for you? What have you done that has illustrated this approach to branding?
I think that this has been particularly in the automotive industry, which is highly competitive. It's about one of the kind of anecdotal examples that I use, and I won't use brand names because of NDAs, but we were tasked to kind of elicit additional test drives for a particular car manufacturer. And so what we did was we created geofences around our competitors, because we knew that the people going to test drive our competitors' cars were already in the market for a new car. And by understanding their mindset, we were able to increase our test drives by a factor of 50%. So these simple tactics, it doesn't also have to be a major campaign. It can also be tactics. And as I kind of often say, is it doesn't have to be a complete shift of your marketing. I think it's just adding it to the mix. It's about being able to look for different tactics. And I think that the last 2 years has taught us as brand custodians that, you know, none of us are excluded from regulation. We can all be regulated in the way that if you look at the events industry, everybody in that space has been regulated over the last 2 years.
Right.
So I think it's really important to think about how our brands, our products, and our services could possibly be regulated, and thinking about how we might pivot.
If I've taken one word out of our conversation, Matthew, it's the word listen. I just think that everyone needs to listen a little bit more, because once you listen, it's where the good ideas flow from. Matthew van der Valk, thank you very much indeed, Executive Creative Director at the VMLY&R agency. Appreciate your time on Mags on Media.
Thanks very much.
So lockdowns, alcohol bans, who on earth would want to market a beer these days? And particularly tough when it's Africa's biggest selling beer brand. I want to introduce you to Arné Rust, who manages AB InBev's Carling Black Label brand. Arné, a very warm welcome to you. Let's start with this. Just how big is Carling in Africa?
Well, Jeremy, Carling is by far the biggest beer brand in Africa. And to give you an idea, we're almost twice the size of the next biggest one, and we sell about 70 million units a month. So that's a significant scale, no matter how you look at it. And it's
what do you think you're doing right? I mean, why is it so big?
The thing that we're doing right is this liquid is just spectacular. If we do blind tastings, about 9 out of 10 people choose Carling Black Label. So why wouldn't it be the biggest beer brand?
So it's been tough, though, I would imagine, over lockdown and the alcohol brands. So let me ask you this. What do you think has given you a marketing edge, and how does a beer remain relevant given the amount of choice that the consumer has right now?
I think those are very pertinent questions, even for beyond beer. I think for any consumer goods, for any business at the moment, because what we've seen in our experience over the last year is that the people who've gone backwards are the people who sat on their hands, the people who didn't do anything, the people who used the lockdown as an excuse to drop all of those marketing funds to the bottom line, who went, oh no, we don't know what's going to happen, there's so much uncertainty, we're just going to stop planning altogether. Where we've seen what we did is by leaning into that uncertainty, by then going out and doing things that made us definitely uncomfortable. Making a hand sanitizer instead of Castle Lager was one of the things that we did. And what that does is it not only keeps you on your toes, but it keeps you top of mind. And I think that answers to some extent your second question is what should brands, what should companies do in these spaces, is they should be clear about what their purpose is. And a brand who is just there, who's just a product, is going to become a commodity. If you don't have a purpose, if you don't have a role in society, and if you're not clear about what that role is, then you're going to get lost when the times get tough.
How does a brand do that? How do you not only define your purpose, but also live up to that purpose? Because we also live in a very cynical society where you can be called out if you're not completely authentic.
No, absolutely. And I think rightfully so. The power has definitely gone to the people way more than it has ever in the past. I think the first thing that any company or any brand has to be very clear of is, what is their archetype? Who are you? Who are you as a brand, as a person? Because when you start using multiple voices and coming from different places, you come across as a bit of a schizophrenic. And we've seen brands or companies where when you don't know who the ad is, you're like, yeah, these guys have no idea who they are. And once you've made that call, you have to stick to it. You have to be consistent. So if I look at the campaigns of ours that have been successful over the last 10, 15 years, something like No Excuse, which is our platform, our initiative against gender violence that Carling Black Label runs. When you enter a space like that, you better know that some people are going to be asking some tough questions. Why is a beer brand talking about domestic violence? And the only way that you can then overcome those reservations is by being there, sticking to your guns, making a real difference, and over time not changing your lane. So we've been with this now since 2017, and we're going to keep banging this drum until we've solved this to a point where it's no longer an issue.
It's a very successful campaign, but let me suggest to you that it's also a risky campaign, because I could very well turn around to you and say that alcohol in many cases is responsible for domestic violence.
Jeremy, I think in that case you'd be wrong. I don't think that alcohol is responsible for domestic violence. We are not naive to say that alcohol doesn't play a role in that situation, which is why we feel like we need to lean into the conversation to be a part of the solution rather than be a part of the problem. But what at the root cause of gender violence is bad men. Or if I can say that differently, wounded men, broken men, the masculinity that they should be bringing to a relationship, the strength that they should be bringing to a relationship is getting warped. And it's for many different reasons, right? Maybe you didn't make the team. Maybe you feel like you're not enough. Maybe you didn't get the job. Maybe you don't like your car you're driving. Maybe you didn't even get the interview. And all of these things then make men, they feel powerless. And once a guy feels powerless, one of two things happens. The first one is they internalize that pain. And then they start imploding, because we suck at talking about our feelings, right? As guys, it's not something that we learn. Boys don't cry. We don't talk about when we're feeling vulnerable. And that is why the male suicide stat is 400% higher than the female statistic. That's the internalization. Or they take this woundedness, they take this powerlessness, and they try and project power onto the world. And that's when you see things like gender violence. That's when they try and do things just to try and convince themselves that they still have a little bit of a semblance of power. And what we're saying is that we need to go and fix masculinity to fix gender violence.
Part of the new incarnation of this campaign is a wedding dress. What's that about?
Jimmy, it's fresh off the press. It's called the bridal armor. And what it is 1 out of 3 women globally will experience abuse at the hands of their intimate partner. So it's by far the single largest sector contributing to gender violence. And that is so starkly contrasted by being in a relationship where this person is supposed to be your partner. They're supposed to be the one who walks with you on this journey, right? And those two things living in the same world just makes no sense to us. So what we did is we've made a wedding dress. We worked with renowned fashion designer Suzanne Haynes, and we made a wedding dress with a twist, a dress that we wish we never had to make. because this dress is informed by the real stories of survivors of abuse from Lifeline, who are an NGO that we partner with to help the survivors of abuse. And we've taken these stories, these real life stories, and built them into the dress. To give you an example, we've got a neck covering on this wedding dress that, when you look at it quickly, it just looks like a pretty strange wedding dress, but it's there to stop the throat from being cut. We have Kevlar lining in the bodice to stop a bullet. There are parts of the train that are flame retardant so that she cannot be set on fire. And all of these stories are hand woven into this 80 plus meters of material that have gone into the dress. And far from it being just a spotlight on the sadness of the situation, we want to ask people to come make a difference. We want to change the wedding vows. We are asking the Department of Home Affairs to amend the vows they currently have as their standard vows at their department, to include an acknowledgement of abuse. For us to say that I will love, cherish, and never abuse you as a groom to the bride.
It's a powerful and audacious goal, and it's a compelling campaign. And I sincerely hope, given the scourge of gender violence that we have in this country, that it is successful. From Carling Black Label, Arné Rust, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Jeremy.